There are three things I buried on this land: my wife, my son, and the hope of ever being a father again in some days. When the wind moans through the fence posts and the sun bleaches the bones of dead trees, I wonder if I buried myself alongside them. The land don't care who you are. You can be rich, poor, saint, or sinner, it'll grind you down the same. Out here, in the Wyoming territory, even the silence has teeth. I came west with dreams and a woman who sang while she cooked beans. Now it's just me, an old hound named Whiskey, and a horse that limps more than it gallops. Every morning is the same. I rise with the sun, boil coffee over coals, check the fences, and talk to no one. My barn creaks when the wind shifts, and the house groans like it remembers the child that never got to cry in its rooms. I remember the doctor's face when he told me I couldn't father children. Said the war or the fever something in my blood made it impossible. After my wife passed during childbirth, child never took a breath. I didn't just bury a name. I buried my voice, my laughter, my future. The land took everything but my shadow, and even that seemed ashamed to follow me. I hadn't seen another soul in nearly 2 months. Just dust and memory. The evening it happened, the sky was streaked orange, and I was mending the gate with numb hands. Whiskey barked a sound I hadn't heard in weeks and bolted toward the barn. I grabbed my rifle, every part of me tensing. We don't get visitors out here. Not the kind you want. Anyhow, the barn door was cracked open. Inside, the hay rustled and something whimpered. Not animal, human, a child's cry, sharp, tired, scared. I lowered the rifle. There she was, curled between bales of hay, dirt on her cheeks, dress torn at the hem. No more than 2, maybe 3. Her cheeks were red with cold, her lip trembling. Her tiny hands clutched the frayed end of a blanket, and she cried without even looking up at me. I moved slow, like I would with a wild colt, whispering something I hadn't used in years. Kindness. She didn't run, just whimpered louder until I knelt beside her. Pinned to her coat was a scrap of yellowed paper. Her name is Clara. She's not safe with me anymore. Please, keep her alive. I stood still, no trembling in my hand. Who'd leave a child out here? Who was running, and from what? Clara looked up at me with eyes the color of storm clouds, wide, unsure. She didn't speak, just held out her tiny hand and touched my thumb, wrapping her fingers around it. I forgot how small they were, children's hands. I wanted to put her back where I found her, walk away, pretend it never happened. I wasn't built for this. I didn't even know how to comfort a child, much less raise one. My life was quiet, ordered, grief-bound. She sneezed. That broke something in me. Back inside the cabin, I stoked the hearth to life. The cabin smelled of old leather and pine smoke. I warmed milk in a pan and found an old wool shirt to wrap around her shoulders. She stared at the fire like it was a miracle. She wouldn't eat, not at first. Just clung to me like a burr on a trail coat. I sat in the rocker, and she climbed into my lap like it was always meant to be hers. I didn't ask for this, didn't want it. But when she nestled into my chest and the crying stopped, the cabin changed. Felt less like a tomb and more like a cradle. I thought about riding to town first light, leaving her with the sheriff, letting someone else figure out her story. But I remembered stories of men who sold children to traveling brothels. Or worse, the kind of evil that wears a badge or a Bible, depending on the town. I looked at her. Clara curled against me, her small breaths fogging up my shirt. I swore I'd never let myself love again, but the girl wouldn't stop crying until she fell asleep in my arms. Morning came with a gray hush. Clara was still sleeping on the rocker, her small fingers clutching the front of my flannel like she feared I'd vanish if she let go. I hadn't moved much all night, afraid to wake her, but now, with the sun filtering through the warped window panes, I eased her onto the bed and stepped back. I started examining what little she'd come with. Her dress was thin, the stitching uneven, homemade, not store-bought. The hem was ripped into places, like it had been caught on something. The blanket she was wrapped in was frayed at the edges. It smelled faintly of smoke. Then I saw it dried blood on the inside lining of the blanket and speckled across the soles of her shoes. Not her blood, least as I could tell. No open cuts, no bruises that bled. Whoever carried her here, they were bleeding when they left her. My stomach turned. This wasn't some careless abandonment. This child hadn't just been dropped off by a desperate mother. This was an escape, hurried, dangerous, and covered in silence. I burned the blanket. Couldn't risk tracking dogs, or worse if someone was looking. Clara watched the smoke curl out of the chimney with wide eyes. By noon, I saddled up my mare, packed Clara against my chest in a sling I'd fashioned from an old saddle blanket, and rode for the trading post 10 miles west. It was the only speck of life out this far, half saloon, half supply stop, one dusty street. People stared as I entered. Ranch hands, drifters, women with faces to warn for their age. I felt them measuring me, this man with a toddler slung close like a papoose. Clara buried her face in my coat. I kept my hand on the revolver at my hip. New niece, I muttered. To the barkeep, when I asked for a bottle of milk and soft bread, the man, red-faced and round, gave a crooked nod. Town ain't seen kids in months. Draft's been sending Emmys. He poured me a coffee, but his eyes darted toward the door. You hear about them riders? He asked under his breath. What riders? 3 men. Came through 4 days ago. Didn't stop long, but they were a-skin odd things. Asked if anyone seen a woman traveling with a baby. One was missing part of his ear. Another had a snake tattoo on his neck. Looked the type to skin a man just to warm their boots. I sipped the bitter coffee, watching the dust blow down the street. In the corner of the post, a man stood like a carved shadow, tall, dark braids under a wide-brimmed hat. He didn't speak, didn't drink, just watched. Clara peeked out from my coat and stared back. Who's that? I asked. The barkeep shrugged. Calls himself Tall Wolf. Never says much, but I'd wager he knows more than we do about this land. Something in me knew that Tracker hadn't missed a detail about Clara. Or me. I left the trading post fast, heart pounding harder with every mile between me and the rumors. That night, back at the cabin, Clara sat on the floor near the fire while I pulled the folded note from my coat. I couldn't read much more than a newspaper headline, but there was a name I trusted: Reverend Amos, a former preacher, now a recluse with a shack north of the cottonwoods. Amos was one of the only men I ever met who didn't lie for power or money. He'd come west after the war, same as me. Some came to claim land. He came to lose memory. He met Clara with a warm smile and a gentle hand on her cheek. Ain't she got an old soul? He murmured, before turning to the note. Under the lamplight, he angled the paper, squinting. Someone scratched this, he muttered, reaching for his magnifier. See here. Barely visible. Numbers, coordinates, maybe, or cipher. Could you figure it? Not yet, he said. But this note, this wasn't for just anyone. It was meant to land in the right hands. Mine. Amos didn't answer. He just patted my shoulder. Watch your fire. Some folks got long. Shadows. We rode back slow, the moon overhead and Clara humming some lullaby I'd never taught her. I couldn't stop thinking about the blood, the riders, the numbers. My hands itched to grip something more than reins to prepare. Back home, I started carving. It had been years since I held a whittling knife, but the motion came back easy, like a song you never quite forget. I took a block of pine wood and shaped a horse-round belly, crooked legs, carved eyes. It wasn't pretty, but it stood. I gave it to Clara as she sat beside the fire. She took it slowly, mouth half open like she couldn't believe it was hers. Then she whispered a word so soft it stopped my breath. D.A. I stared at her. She blinked at me. With absolute trust, my chest ached. I turned away before she could see tears streaking my dirt-caked face. She ain't mine, I muttered into the shadows, but I'll be damned if I let anyone hurt her. I tucked her in that night beside the fire, her toy horse clutched in one arm. The wind howled through the cracks in the window pane, and I sat on the porch with my rifle across my knees, watching for shadows. I thought I'd found a child, but what I really found was a storm waiting to reach my door. By the 4th morning, something was wrong. The barn door was open just an inch, but it was latched the night before. I walked slow, rifle slung over my shoulder. Clara still asleep in the cabin. The dirt outside the barn looked disturbed. My boots crunched over scattered straw and horse droppings as I knelt down. Tracks, boot prints. 3, maybe for different sets, and they didn't match mine. The edges were fresh, some smaller, sharper. One of them dragged a bit like a limp. I followed them around the barn side, where they vanished near the creek bed. I whistled for whiskey. He didn't come, not to the barn, not to the porch. I found him an hour later near the fenceline, curled and still. His body was stiff. At his mouth foamed. Poison. My knees hit the ground before I meant them to. I ran a shaking hand down his fur, my throat tight, jaw clenched. He'd guarded this land since my wife's death. Died without a sound. I buried him under the lone pine tree, just past the ridge. Clara stood beside me, holding her wooden horse. like it could keep the world from shifting. That night, I didn't sleep. I built a makeshift perimeter of cans and broken glass around the cabin. I oiled my rifle, loaded my revolver, and lit no lanterns. Just the fire in the hearth and the cold barrel under my palm. They came at dusk. 3 shadows emerged at the edge of the trees, their silhouettes long in the failing light. No horses, just men. One tall, carrying a rusted shotgun, another shorter, hunched, with a bandana over his mouth. The third walked with a limp. I woke Clara with a hand on her shoulder, whispered soft and firm. She didn't cry, just clutched her horse. I carried her to the root cellar, set her inside with a blanket, and whispered, "No matter what happens, you don't come out. You hear me?" She nodded. Then I bolted the door and stepped out onto the porch. "Evening," the tall one called. His voice was sharp, confident. "We're just passing through. Wondered if you had any food or children." I didn't answer, just raised the rifle and fired. The bullet hit the porch rail beside the speaker on purpose. Let him know I wasn't aiming to talk. They scattered, weapons out. Gunfire cracked the still air, and I ducked behind the water trough. Wood splintered around me as they fired. One tried circling toward the side limper. I hit him in the thigh, and he screamed like a banshee, but I wasn't fast enough. A shot tore into my shoulder, hot, sharp, knocking me sideways. Blood soaked through my shirt. I dropped behind a hay bale, my vision spinning. They were closing in. I could hear their boots crunching dry earth. My good hand fumbled for the revolver. And then a silent shadow moved behind them, dot and arrow pierced the tall one's neck. He dropped without a sound, blood spurting across the dirt. The second man turned, another arrow lodged into his gut. He screamed, staggered, collapsed beside the porch. The third, the limper, ran. Another arrow missed him by inches, slicing his coat. My head spun as I slumped back, pain blooming like fire across my chest. Through half-lidded eyes, I saw the figure emerge from the trees. Tall wolf. He knelt beside me without a word, yanked my shirt open, checked the wound, and then, behind him, Clara's voice, "D.A." He turned. She stood just outside the cellar door, holding the wooden horse tight to her chest, tears streaking down her face. Tall wolf lifted her in one arm and carried her inside. I passed out on the porch, the sky spinning above me, the stars, quiet witnesses. I woke to the smell of smoke and the warmth of bandages wrapped tight across my chest. My arm ached like hell, but I was alive. The cabin was lit dimly, and Clara slept on the floor, wrapped in a blanket. Beside the fire, Tall Wolf sat sharpening the blade with smooth, measured strokes. He didn't speak, didn't need to. I sat up. Slowly, he didn't stop me. We watched the fire for a long time, both silent. Then I reached for a tin of beans, slid it toward him. He nodded once and accepted. He didn't ask why I'd risked my life for a girl that wasn't mine, and I didn't ask why he saved us. Some things don't need words. We rode out before sunrise, the note folded in my pocket like a question that had waited too long for an answer. Tall Wolf hadn't said a word, but something had shifted between us after the night of the raid. There was a rhythm to our silence, now a trust made not with promises, but shared blood and fire. The numbers scratched into the note led us north, through a stretch of forest where the trees stood so close together. The light had to beg its way through. Clara sat between us in the saddle, bundled tight against the cold. She hummed to herself as the wind whistled through the branches, not knowing we were riding toward the story of her birth. Around midday, we crested a ridge and saw it, a cabin what was left of one burned black and sagging into the ground. The roof had collapsed in on itself. And one wall was scorched so clean it looked like a giant hand had tried to wipe the place from the map. We dismounted and moved slow. Fresh graves marked with stones stood behind the cabin, 2 of them. No names, just pie markers, one wrapped in a child's blue ribbon, fluttering in the wind. Inside, ashen silence. Floorboards creaked. Tall Wolf searched the back while I checked near the hearth. Beneath the loose plank, I found a tin box, rusted at the corners. Inside, photographs. One of them showed a woman holding Clara. She had the same storm gray eyes, the same quiet strength in her face. Another photograph showed that same woman standing beside a man, white, tall, broad-shouldered, with hard eyes. Something in my gut twisted. I'd seen eyes like that in war, eyes that wanted to own, not love. At the bottom of the tin was a folded letter. The paper was thin, stained by soot, but the name on the front stopped me cold. Tall Wolf. I handed it to him without a word. He opened it slowly. his face unreadable as his eyes scanned the page. She was my sister. He said quietly, married. A man who broke her down till she ran. Took the child and hid. Said word to me through that note. But she never made it. My throat tightened. She came to you. I said, no. He replied, voice like gravel. The note was never for you. We stood there in the wreckage of a woman's last hope. Clara playing quietly with twigs near the porch. I'd come all this way thinking I was saving her. But maybe I was just keeping her warm until the right hands could hold her again. Back at the cabin, the weight settled on me like snowfall. She called me DA again that night. Whispered it while I was rocking her to sleep. My arms stiff from riding, my heart sore from knowing. I sat by the fire long after she slept. Tall Wolf stared into the flames like he saw every ghost this land had ever made. She needs both. He said at last, blood and love. You gave her one. I'll give her the other. I didn't argue, didn't cry. I just nodded, because he was right. And it broke me. The next morning, I dressed her in a clean wool coat, packed the carved wooden horse in her arms, brushed her hair with shaking hands and kissed her temple one last time. She didn't understand. She reached out for me as Tall Wolf lifted her into the saddle, her eyes wide, full of tears. DA. I stepped back, jaw clenched. You be brave. Now, I said softly, you remember the horse, and you remember the fire. You remember I love you, even if just for a little while. She clutched the horse so tight I thought the wood might splinter. Then Tall Wolf turned his mount and rode off across the prairie, Clara looking back until the trees swallowed them whole. And I stood there, just me and the wind again. The ranch is quieter now, too quiet, but I move with purpose. Fix fences, muck stalls, patch the roof. Clara's laughter still echoes in the corners of the cabin when the light hits right. I planted a rose bush beneath the old oak, next to the place where my wife rests. Beside it, a second marker, no name, just a tiny carved horse nailed to the wood. The land still won't give me a child, but maybe it gave me something better, a reason to believe. So if this story touched you like it did me, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, because sometimes the smallest hands leave the biggest mark.